For 15 centuries, the mud along the northern shores of the Sea of Galilee swallowed a secret hole. Scholars spent generations assuring the world that every word Jesus ever spoke to his disciples had been captured, sealed inside the pages of Scripture, complete, unchanging, final. But what if they were wrong? What if the most important instruction Jesus ever gave to Peter, the man he called the Rock, the man handed the keys to the kingdom, was never written into any gospel? What if it was carved instead into a floor, hidden under 20 inches of ancient silt, waiting for a team of archaeologists with the right tools and maybe the right moment to finally pull it back into the light? To understand what was found, you first need to understand what was lost. Bethsaida. If you've read the Bible, that name should send a chill down your spine. This wasn't just any village. According to the Gospel of John, Bethsaida was the hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip, 3 of Jesus' closest disciples. It was the place where Jesus healed a blind man. It was the staging ground for the feeding of the 5,000, one of the most famous miracles in all of Christian history. In many ways, Bethsaida functioned as the operational headquarters of the early apostolic movement. But Bethsaida is also known for something darker. It is one of only 3 cities that Jesus openly condemned. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus delivers a stunning rebuke. "Woe to you, Bethsaida!" warning that the city witnessed miracles and still refused to change. He declared it would be brought down to Hades, and history, with brutal precision, appears to have obliged. By the 4th century, Bethsaida had simply vanished. Roman writers stopped mentioning it. It disappeared from maps. The ground, it seemed, had swallowed the city whole. For nearly 2,000 years, no one could agree on where Bethsaida actually stood. 2 rival locations waged an academic war for the title. Et Tel, a rocky hilltop packed with impressive ruins, but too far from the water to make sense for a fishing village. And El Araj, a swampy stretch of shoreline on the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee, perpetually waterlogged, largely dismissed. For generations, the skeptics insisted El Araj was a dead end. Nothing important could survive in that much mud. In 2016, a joint team from Kinneret College in Israel and Nyack College in New York decided to take the risk. Professors Mordecai Aviam and Stephen Notley led the effort, drawn not by treasure but by a theory, that El Araj matched the biblical and historical description of Bethsaida more precisely than any other candidate site. The excavation was miserable from the start. The air hung heavy with the stench of soaked earth and rotting vegetation. Pumps ran around the clock to keep lake water from flooding the trenches. Every foot they dug, the groundwater fought back, as if the land itself was trying to protect something. For weeks, they uncovered little but endless gray silt, scattered Roman pottery, and a growing sense that maybe, just maybe, the skeptics had been right all along. Morale was slipping. Then a volunteer's trowel struck something solid. Not the dull thud of compacted soil. A sharp, unmistakable clang. Metal on stone. The team stopped, began clearing with their bare hands, scraping away layer after layer of grime. First, a line appeared, then a corner, then a wall, built with perfect 90-degree angles, deliberate and precise. As the excavation widened, the scale became undeniable. This was no fisherman's hut. The walls were massive, engineered to endure centuries. And as they dug deeper, they revealed the unmistakable curved shape of an apse, the semicircular alcove where the altar of a church would stand. This was a basilica, an enormous one, and it stood exactly where ancient pilgrims had always claimed the house of Peter once was. The mud that everyone assumed would destroy any ruins beneath it had done exactly the opposite. It had sealed the church like a time capsule, protecting it from weather, looters, and centuries of marching armies. As conservators gently washed away 1,500 years of decay, something extraordinary happened. Color bloomed beneath their hands. Reds, blues, yellows. A mosaic floor emerged, shockingly intact. And then they saw the words. Greek letters pressed into the tiles, forming a formal inscription framed inside a circular medallion, a ring of black stone tesserae. An expert in ancient Greek was summoned immediately. The team gathered close, cameras flashing, hearts pounding. The inscription opened with the name of the donor, Konstantinos, the servant of the Messiah. Then the tone shifted. It invoked Peter, not casually, not as a footnote, but with a title that stopped everyone cold. Chief and Commander of the Heavenly Apostles and Bearer of the Keys of Heaven. Pause on that phrase. In theology, language is never accidental. Those specific Greek words carry enormous weight. They imply rank, authority, a clear chain of command. This wasn't a community celebrating Peter as one disciple among many. This was a declaration that he sat at the top, the supreme leader, the one in charge. This inscription, pressed into a floor in rural Galilee, strikes right at the heart of one of Christianity's oldest and most divisive debates: authority. The Catholic Church has grounded its legitimacy for 2 millennia on the belief that Peter was the first pope, the rock on which the Church was built. Many Protestant traditions have pushed back, arguing Peter was simply a leader among equals. But buried here, beneath the mud of Peter's own hometown, was a 5th century text that didn't equivocate. It supported the Supreme Commander view, and it was written by the people who actually lived where Peter lived. The excavation directors were measured but couldn't hide their excitement. Professor Notley called it our strongest indicator that the basilica had a special association with St. Peter. It confirmed what an 8th century bishop named Willibald had written in his travel logs after spending the night at the site in 724 AD, that there was a church there, built over the house of Peter and Andrew. For over 1,000 years, scholars had considered Willibald's account interesting but unverifiable. Now they had the floor he likely walked across, but the real revelation wasn't the inscription. It was what the archaeologists found beneath it. When conservators carefully lifted sections of the Byzantine mosaic floor, they revealed something that shifted the entire discovery into a different category entirely. Beneath the church was not empty earth. There were walls, older walls, Roman-era walls, and beneath those, 1st century walls that were standing during the lifetime of Jesus. The team uncovered lead fishing net weights, iron hooks, coins dated to the 1st century. This was a fishing village, active during the exact years Jesus walked the shore of that lake. It was the evidence scholars had been waiting decades to find: a smoking gun. But the detail that unsettled everyone most was the precision of the construction above it. The Byzantine architects hadn't placed their basilica randomly. They had positioned it with extraordinary care, centering the entire structure over the remains of one specific house. Not a temple, not an administrative building, one house belonging to fishermen. In the ancient world, you do not erect a massive basilica over an ordinary fisherman's home unless that place carries weight beyond measure. The builders went to remarkable lengths, constructing a protective enclosure around the original room, treating the dirt floor of the old structure not as rubble to be cleared, but as sacred ground to be preserved. Every architectural decision points toward the same conclusion. The people who built this church were convinced, absolutely convinced, that they were standing in the home of Peter. And this is where the story takes its sharpest turn. As researchers continued analyzing the mosaic, they noticed something they hadn't anticipated. The main inscription, the dedication to Peter, was not the only text in the medallion. There were fainter letters inside the ring, barely visible, worn smooth by thousands of feet walking over them across the centuries, or perhaps carved lightly on purpose, meant only for those who knew to look. Advanced imaging technology was brought in. Infrared scanners passed over the stones, cutting through the grime and damage left by time. When the images appeared on the screens, the room went quiet. What the team was reading appeared to be a quotation, words written as direct speech, a command spoken by the Lord to his disciple. Ancient churches often embed Bible verses into their floors and walls. That's not unusual, but this text didn't match any known manuscript. It wasn't a standard quotation from the accepted New Testament. It was different, a variation, a deviation, or, and this is the possibility that scholars have been wrestling with ever since, something older, a version that was later edited out. The reconstructed sentence read something like this: "Guard my house, for I go to prepare the heavens." Consider how strange that is. In the Gospel of John, Jesus tells Peter to feed my sheep. In Matthew, he calls him the rock on which the church will be built. But nowhere in the accepted canon does Jesus ever say to Peter, "Guard my house." And that second line, "For I go to prepare the heavens," echoes a verse from John 14, where Jesus promises, "I go to prepare a place for you." But the wording here is subtly, significantly different. It suggests division of labor. Jesus is departing to build something cosmic. Peter is left behind with a specific earthly assignment: to guard the house, which raises an obvious and uncomfortable question. What house? Scholars have a word for this kind of text: agrapha. It means unwritten things in Greek. These are sayings attributed to Jesus that survive in ancient documents, inscriptions, papyri, and early church writings, but that never made it into the Bible as we know it. Dozens of these sayings exist, scattered across the ancient world. Some are strange, some are deeply moving, some may be later inventions, and some carry details so specific and so consistent with the earliest layers of the tradition that dismissing them feels like intellectual dishonesty. What makes this particular inscription extraordinary is its location. This isn't a scrap of papyrus found in a jar in the desert. This is a phrase permanently pressed into the floor of a major Byzantine pilgrimage site in the hometown of Peter himself, in a church built directly over what the builders believed was his actual house. That gives it a kind of weight that most agrapha simply don't carry. The community that built this church wasn't guessing. They were passing down memory, a living tradition that stretched back centuries, from grandfathers to grandsons, from fishermen who knew these shores to pilgrims who walked them in reverence. They remembered something the gospel writers either didn't know, didn't include, or chose to leave out. And what they remembered was a command: stay here, protect this place. The phrase, "guard my house," does something to how we understand Peter's role that no gospel passage quite accomplishes. In the New Testament, Peter is a fisherman turned preacher, a fallible man who denies Jesus 3 times and then rebuilds himself into the leader of the early church. He's an administrator, a shepherd, a rock, but a rock that can be moved, shaped, repositioned. But a guardian is something different. A guardian stands watch. A guardian holds the line. A guardian doesn't wander. In early Christian belief, sacred places were not peaceful by default. They were understood as battlegrounds, specific locations where the spiritual and physical worlds pressed up against each other most intensely, where opposition was strongest, where, according to ancient tradition, forces hostile to holiness pushed back hardest. Demons in early Christian cosmology despised holy ground. They sought to reclaim it, corrupt it, erase it. So, when Jesus tells Peter to guard my house, it may not have been symbolic at all. It may have been a literal assignment, a spiritual duty rooted in protection, in standing watch over a place understood as sacred and vulnerable. That reshapes everything. It suggests Peter wasn't just tasked with building an institution. He was tasked with defending a location, and that location, this stretch of shoreline in Galilee, was treated by the earliest believers not as one holy place among many, but as something like an embassy, heaven's outpost, a junction point between what is above and what is below. Peter, by this reading, wasn't the first pope, he was the first sentinel. There is one last detail worth sitting with. The church at El Araj wasn't destroyed by enemies. It wasn't burned or sacked or deliberately dismantled. An earthquake in the 8th century swallowed it whole. The ground opened and the structure collapsed, burying the mosaic under meters of rubble and silt, sealing it away from the world for over 1,000 years. Now it's back. The excavation team has covered the site again to protect it while preservation work continues. But the words are out. The inscription has been photographed, scanned, translated, and published. It cannot be buried again in the ways that matter. Joint lead excavator Professor Mordecai Avium put it plainly. The discoveries at El Araj constitute, in his view, solid and well-founded evidence that this is Bethsaida. Not proof beyond all possible doubt. Archaeology rarely offers that. But evidence compelling enough that dismissing it requires more effort than accepting it. And the inscription, that phrase pressed into the floor, that echo of a conversation between Jesus and Peter that no gospel recorded, sits there as a question that refuses to go away. If this is what the people of Bethsaida remembered, what else have we forgotten? What other words were spoken at the edges of that lake, at the door of that house in the early hours of a morning 2,000 years ago? Words that never made it into Scripture, that were passed down instead through living memory, through whispered traditions, through floors built to outlast empires. Guard my house, for I go to prepare the heavens. Somebody stayed behind to hold the line. The question is whether anyone is still listening to what they left us. If you found this as unsettling and fascinating as we did, leave a comment below and tell us what you think. Is this a genuine lost saying of Jesus, or just a beautiful floor? And if you want more buried history pulled back into the light, hit like and subscribe. We're just getting started.